Shooters, shoot 'em up, or in short SHMUP, is a genre of games not for the faint of heart. SHMUPs are filled with tough stages, where memorization of the enemy patterns, along with managing weapons and sub-weapons, is essential in order to progress further. Huge boss fights, where the player needs to be perfect and must have quick reflexes, is also a key element of any shoot 'em up. Silver Surfer for the NES falls into the SHMUP category. The legendary difficulty of this game, however, is hugely exaggerated, thanks in large part to the AVGN episode. Let's take a look at the complaints made by the nerd, analyze the difficulty of the game, and explore the game's weak and strong points. Before we dive into this episode, let's set the record straight. When we talk about the nerd, or AVGN, we're referring to the fictional character created and portrayed by James Rolfe, not the man himself. Our aim isn't to criticize or shit on James Rolfe, but rather to analyze the games featured on the AVGN show and explore whether they have any redeemable qualities. This analysis is done in two parts. First, we'll confirm or debunk a specific complaint or statement made by the nerd. Then, we'll share our thoughts on the game, diving deeper into its mechanics, design, boss fights, and more. Alright, on with the show. This is Debunking the Nerd. We'll start with the lame weapon complaint.
Your weapon's kinda lame, but there's power-ups which let you shoot double. There's not much else I think you can get. I mean, you can shoot backwards, kinda clumsy to switch back because you press the B button to change direction, but use A to shoot. I guess that wasn't a good time to demonstrate.
The weapon system in Silver Surfer is pretty basic for a shoot 'em up game. You have your standard option upgrade, which lets you shoot double, backwards, and below in horizontal mode, and triple in top-down mode. The player can collect fire rate upgrades with a maximum of 5. It's very easy to max out the fire rate and option upgrades in the first stage, which basically unlocks the easy mode right from the start. There is also the screen clearing bomb, which you can use if you get yourself in a pickle. That's really all there is to the weapon. So, is the weapon in Silver Surfer lame? Absolutely. Don't get me wrong, the weapon and the upgrades you get are more than enough to beat the game. The weapon system, however, is very basic and bland. Considering the fact that Silver Surfer came out later in the NES's lifespan, the developers could have done a better job with the weapons. Take for example Gradius, another SHMUP that was released roughly 4 years before Silver Surfer. The weapon system is way more complex and forces the player to get familiar with each upgrade and switch between weapon types, depending on the situation on screen. Silver Surfer drops the ball on this one, so we agree with the nerd. Next up is the sore thumb complaint.
If you play this game, one thing I can guarantee is that your thumb is going to get pretty damn sore from tapping that button. There's not one instant when you can take a break. You're constantly firing away, even when there's nothing in sight because you don't know what's coming up. And this wouldn't bother me so much if you could just hold down the button and let it keep shooting, but no. So what you need is a turbo button. Whether it's an NES Advantage or an NES Max, put that other controller away, press that turbo button, and never let go.
The amount of shooting that needs to be done is way overblown by the nerd. In Silver Surfer, enemies come in small waves. Following each wave, the player has enough time to get ready for the next one. You definitely don't need to keep shooting, especially when there's nothing happening on screen. Typically, in shoot 'em ups, the player is not given a lot of downtime between waves, forcing the player to often take split-second decisions and hope for the best. Most, but not all SHMUPs on the NES have an auto-attack feature when the attack button is held. The exclusion of auto-attack in Silver Surfer was likely an oversight from the developers. The turbo controller solves this issue, but makes the game ridiculously easy. Anyway, we don't agree with the nerd that there's a lot of shooting to do in Silver Surfer. On to the next complaint.
I can't touch the walls? That's right, you can't touch anything in this game, so don't f*** around. Watch the jack-o'-lanterns touch the damn ceiling. You touch the top of the building, you die. You touch the ceiling, you die. You touch the floor, you die. How do you die from just touching a wall? I can understand if he's flying at like 200 miles per hour and he crashes into the wall, but the fact that he just touches the wall and dies is just ridiculous.
In any shoot-'em-up game, touching the floor or ceiling is always an instant death. Complaining about it is like whining about falling into a pit in a platformer game, which is totally pointless. We disagree with the nerd on this one. Let's take a look at the Unclear obstacles complaint.
You don't know what's supposed to be underneath you or blocking you. I'm assuming I can't touch these wooden parts. Uh-oh, now I'm probably oh, never mind. I guess I can go through those. See, the graphics are so unclear as to what you're allowed to touch and what you're not. You don't know what the hazards are. There's so many obstacles, it's unbelievable. I can't touch that red pot? Here we go. Oh yeah, oh god, I touched the log.
There's a simple way to determine whether you can pass through an obstacle. Shoot it. If the projectile doesn't go through, neither can you. But if it passes through, so can you. Shooting an obstacle to test whether you can pass through is a pretty intuitive mechanic, and it's a fundamental concept in every shoot-'em-up game. Even if this is your first time playing such a game, it shouldn't take long to figure it out. Honestly, we don't agree with the nerd on this one. Let's move on to complaint number 5, navigating the narrow spots.
Alright, another overhead. I can't believe this. You can't touch the ground. That means that you have to stay in the brown area, which pretty much limits you to about 20% of the screen. This is ridiculous. Just staying within this narrow range. You have such a tight space to maneuver if you want to kill these things. Come on, come on.
The action takes place in Firelord stage, section 1, so straight after the first level's boss fight. In the overhead sections, Silver Surfer's surfboard is the entire hitbox. Killing the enemies as soon as they pop up on the screen solves the narrow spot problem. If you have managed to max out all the weapon upgrades in the first level, then this section is trivial to go through. Let's say you enter this stage without any upgrades at all. Perhaps that's the first level you want to try out. While this increases the difficulty slightly, you get a fire rate upgrade at the very beginning of this section, and one more soon after. This is more than enough to beat this section, as you'll have enough time to kill any enemy that pops out. Speaking of the enemies, here are those hand enemies the nerd had the difficulty with. You can either kill the hands or pass underneath them as soon as they disappear in the poop-colored water. Yes, that's right, you can pass through the hands. This wasn't mentioned at all by the nerd. There are only 3 narrow spots in this section, and you don't need pixel-perfect accuracy to pass through them. It's safe to say that we don't agree with the nerd on this one. Next up is the legendary difficulty complaint.
It's horrible, and I dare you to play it. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's bad, but this game just went way too far. The difficulty is legendary. This is the grand champion of hard games. It doesn't around. Silver Surfer, on the other hand, just says all that. If you're gonna play, you gotta be hardcore.
Let's address the elephant in the room. Silver Surfer is not a legendary difficult game. It is not the grand champion of hard games. It's not even the most difficult shoot-'em-up for the NES. You want to see what a really difficult NES shoot-'em-up game looks like? This is Summer Carnival 92 Rekka. The Silver Surfer AVGN episode aired originally on June 5th, 2007. Before this, there were no claims on the internet about the game being one of the most difficult NES titles, but after the episode, the internet consensus shifted, and Silver Surfer was suddenly considered the hardest or one of the hardest NES games. I didn't want to go near Silver Surfer with a 10-foot pole after seeing the AVGN episode back in 2007. The way the game was portrayed made me steer clear of it for a long time. In my mind, this really was the hardest NES game, and a lot of websites ranked it as such, reinforcing my beliefs. In February of 2024, I've decided to give this game a try and was surprised to find out that the legendary difficulty was way overblown. Unlike in most other shooters, the enemies in Silver Surfer come in small waves, followed by periods of where nothing happens on screen. Boss fights are a joke, and aside from a few cheap moments that you need to memorize, there's not much of a challenge. The only challenging part of the game is the last stage, the magic domain. The difficulty ramps up here, and the game finally shows you its teeth. With a little practice though, this stage is manageable. Do you think Silver Surfer is the hardest NES game of all time? Cause we certainly don't. Let's go to the next complaint.
Why couldn't there be a health bar, like 3 hits? Would that be okay? No. 1 hit and you're dead.
The fact that you can get hit only once pretty much means that you're weaker than every other enemy in the game.
Silver Surfer could benefit from having a health system, but unfortunately it wasn't included in the game. In our opinion, to compensate for one-hit death, Silver Surfer could have let the player continue from the point they died, along with a temporary invincibility for a couple of seconds. This could have made the game more accessible to beginner players. We agree with the nerd on this one. Let's jump into the insane enemy patterns complaint.
Ugh! God, I hate those gargoyles just all over the place. I hate them. I just hate them. Look at this. This pattern is just insane. It's basically just a bunch of lines waving across the screen. And if you go anywhere near those paths, you're dead. And look at this. There's so much stuff coming at you. Bullets are flying everywhere. Ugh! Let's pause this. Just look. Look. Any of these areas are dead zones. You have stuff coming at you every which way, which means there's not one safe spot because you need to keep moving forward. You just have to play the out of it until you know in advance exactly what's going to happen. You're just trying to avoid this stuff that's coming sideways, and then this gun appears at the top of the screen with no warning and shoots in 3 directions. Instant death. If you try to blast it away as soon as it appears, you just end up getting yourself killed too, because you need to be in the line of fire in order to shoot at it. Sometimes you come to like a blockade of enemies, just a flood of bullets coming down the whole screen. It's just one big dead zone. If you're in that area, you're simply dead.
To be fair to the nerd, we're tackling the so-called insane patterns with the same upgrades he had. First up is the gargoyle pattern in Mephisto stage, section 1. Honestly, it's not as bad as it looks. The gargoyles fly in from below, swaying side to side. All you need to do here is stick to the lower part of the screen. You don't even need to shoot them, although we don't recommend doing that. Moving on, the next pattern ramps things down even further. What the nerd didn't show is that you can actually blast those enemies below. There's an option upgrade right before this part of the map, so you might as well put it to good use. Leaving enemies behind just to whine about them later doesn't make a lot of sense. The same situation happens with the turrets. Some of these turrets could have been dispatched beforehand, making it easier to deal with upcoming enemies. Shoot and dodge, it's that easy. Another solution to this problem is to use the screen clearing bomb. But the most misleading pattern shown by the nerd is the eye pattern. These eyes don't just pop out from thin air. You have plenty of time to either dodge or shoot them. Silver Surfer doesn't have any insane patterns that the players must memorize, and the situations that were shown by the nerd can all be easily overcome by either shooting the enemies or dodging their projectiles. We completely disagree with the nerd on this one. We've saved the pumpkins for last. This enemy deserves its own spotlight, since the nerd had a really tough time with it.
Whoa, watch the fire. Oh, jack-o'-lanterns? Alright, let's try again. Dodge the fire, stay up and watch the jack-o'-lanterns. Oh, better watch that thing. Oh god, I gotta go down. Oh, your mother. Fire's coming down. Jack-o'-lanterns. Oh. Alright, this time I'm trying to shoot those jack-o'-lanterns. Stay back. Oh, god. Alright, getting into place. Watch the walls. Oh, you pumpkin piece of. Okay, this time stand at the top. Don't get hit. Get under that thing. Here we go. Yes! No!
The part with the jack-o'-lanterns is one of the few cheap moments in the game. You can't really know on your first playthrough that there are enemies below you just waiting to pop up. Right before the pumpkin ambush, you are treated to molten lava from above. These two paired together make up for a really nasty cheap shot. The best way to get through this part is just stick to the left of the screen as much as possible and wait for the screen to scroll. Cheap moments like this are not a sign of good game design, and the nerd's frustration is understandable. Later on, in the same stage, players get hit with another pumpkin ambush. Just like before, the best way to get through this part is by sticking to the left side of the screen. Are these ambushes annoying? Absolutely. Are they impossible to get through unless you're a hardcore gamer? Not really. But moments like this don't make the gameplay any more fun. We agree with the nerds on this one. That wraps up our analysis of AVGN's complaints. We disagree with most of the nerds' points. Obviously, a lot of it was exaggerated for comedy, but in the process, Silver Surfer got stuck with the reputation of being the hardest NES game ever made. So, what's our take on the game? The game is split into 6 stages, each consisting of 3 sections. Stages can be selected in any order, except for the last stage, which unlocks after all 5 previous stages are beaten. The first 2 sections sometimes have a sub-boss at the end, and the third section always has a boss fight. After defeating a boss, you retrieve a part of the cosmic device. What is a cosmic device, you might ask? The game tells you all about it in the story. The story of this game is told with a few lazily written cutscenes. The guy in the goofy hat, Galactus, sends the surfer to retrieve parts of the cosmic device, which are scattered in different parts of the universe. Our protagonist ponders what will happen if he refuses, but the silver-tongued devil in the goofy hat talks him into taking the task anyway. We are treated to the next cutscene after collecting 5 parts of the device. Galactus sends the surfer right into the heart of enemy territory, the magic domain. When the surfer asks what dangers lie ahead, the guy in the goofy hat basically says to go and find out yourself. Thanks for the help, asshole. After defeating the final boss and assembling the device, Galactus suddenly exclaims that the device now belongs to him. The surfer tells Galactus to suck rocks, and that's the end of the story. A true masterpiece. We have mentioned the weapon system before, but to emphasize it again, it falls short compared to most other shoot-'em-up games. The game could be much more fun with different kind of weapons, like in Gradius. This takes away from the overall experience and makes the gameplay feel clunky and boring. Considering that the game was released late in the console's life, the visual side could have been a lot better. Stage design ranges from average to lazy to downright awful. The sprite work is bad. Here's what our protagonist has to deal with: frogs, fishes, green heads, pumpkin heads, cartoon ghosts, whatever the f this is, chromosomes, and so on. Speaking of the protagonist, the surfer himself looks only slightly better than a typical Atari 2600 protagonist. Silver Surfer was blessed with a stellar soundtrack. The music was composed by the legendary Fallen brothers, Jeff and Tim, who always managed to push the hardware to its limits. The soundtrack is definitely the strongest part of the game. Give it a listen if you haven't heard it before. They really cut corners with the boss fights. The sprite work is a mess. More effort went into their portraits than the bosses themselves. Most of them just stand there, so the whole fight is basically you shooting at them while dodging the occasional enemy or projectile. You will encounter sub-bosses throughout the game. Some are just beefed up versions of regular enemies, while others are unique, though none of them put up much of a fight. At one point, you even get to fight Shrek. Just kidding, it's actually Green Thanos. They really went nuts with the final boss, in a bad kind of way. First of all, the game hypes up the final boss as Mr. Sinister. Instead, you get to fight this pink in white boots, which has an enormous amount of health. The fight itself is super easy, but it drags for what it seems an eternity. We have already talked about the difficulty when we looked at the nerd's take on it, but I want to throw in a few more points. Just like most NES games, the game can be difficult if you lose all your upgrades. In Silver Surfer, it only takes one hit to lose a life. The game has checkpoints, and depending on where you die, building your way back up can be either a breeze or a bit of pain. But overall, the game is not stingy on the upgrades. As mentioned before, the game has some traps that the player won't be able to anticipate on their first playthrough. Moments like this feel cheap and inflate the difficulty, but thankfully they're not too common in the game. Honestly, we'd give the game a difficulty rating of 5 out of 10. And seriously, whoever put The Adventures of Bayou Billy at number 9 and Silver Surfer at number 1 on their hardest NES games list needs to step outside and touch some grass. The game has a password system that you can access by pressing and holding up on the title screen on both controllers. You've got your standard passwords for invisibility, full upgrades, or jumping straight to a specific stage. Then there's the passwords for second and third loops of the game. These add extra challenge to the game by beefing up enemies with extra hit points and throwing more enemies in boss encounters. Other than that, there's really not much else to it, so don't waste your time on these extra playthroughs. Overall, the game feels rushed and somewhat unfinished. It's an average game, but not by any means a bad one. With some extra work put into it, it could have been a decent shoot-'em-up title. We don't recommend this game if it's your first encounter with the shooter genre, as this could make a poor impression on the whole genre overall. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.